Welcome to the Happy Mama Movement podcast. I'm Amy Taylor-Kabbaz, mama, journalist, coach, and founder of Mama Rising. This podcast is a space of community and collaboration. We gather stories of matrescence, motherhood, womanhood, and change told by our Mama Rising coaches and mothers around the globe, in the knowing that through our stories, we can begin to heal and change the way the world sees, values, and supports mothers everywhere. So, welcome to the Happy Mama Movement.
Welcome back to the podcast, everybody, and welcome to our first episode for 2025. When I think about the year ahead, one of my big commitments personally is to connect even more to my body's wisdom, to learn how to listen to it, to trust it, and to feel fully embodied in my own feminine wisdom, power, strength, and resilience. It's been a wild ride for most of us for the last few years, and I know my body has so much that it wants me to hear and to honor and to heal. Which is why I wanted to start 2025 with an interview with Tami Lynn Kent. Tami, if you don't know her, she is the founder of Holistic Pelvic Care for Women, and author of 3 phenomenal books. Pop these into your reading list for this year, mamas. Wild Feminine, Wild Mothering, and Wild Creative. She's an international teacher and TEDx speaker and mother of 3 boys. And as you're about to hear in this really inspiring and empowering interview, she shares what she learnt as she became a mother more than 20 years ago, what she's learnt now after supporting and interviewing and researching and listening to thousands of mothers and teaching so many women around the world about their own body and feminine powers. She also shares what she now knows about how to mother sons and how we can all be the most embodied and steady version of ourselves for our children. Please check the show notes for the latest details of the masterclasses that she refers to in this interview, and you'll probably see me there. I know I'll definitely be signing up for them. So welcome to 2025. I deeply appreciate you being here and being a part of this global community of matrescence activists and mamas. Thank you and enjoy. Tami, welcome to the podcast. Your books and your work quite often pop up in our Mama Rising community of students, and you've been on my wish list for a long time to have you on the podcast. So thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here, Amy.
We have so much to cover in half an hour, but as always, I like to start with the personal before we get to the cultural, bigger impact that we want to have. So could you take us back to your experience of becoming a mother and what you expected it to be like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think like so many women, I had a mental expectation, and I come from a Western mental culture. So most of my background was, studying and being in school and kind of academic. And so when I became pregnant, and especially when I had my baby almost 25 years ago, it'd be 25 in February, I was so shocked at what I didn't know. And mostly I wasn't really very embodied because everything I had learned, I was academic. I became a women's health physical therapist. It was a lot of schooling, I was really in my head and kind of in the linear world, the patriarchal world, I've been a product of, where it was a lot of external and kind of achievement oriented. And now I had this beautiful, sweet, precious baby who was very, slows you down, takes you directly to the feminine in your own body, the most feminine place in your body, the womb and the pelvis. It activated me in a way I'd never been opened, called me back to my center, but also I came to terms, especially with my first child, of how much I had been away from that center point. Didn't really know how to slow down, didn't know how to move rhythmically, didn't understand the feminine, didn't even really know what it was. And I had to do a lot of work to kind of stitch back together my relationship with that part that is actually ultimately the feminine, is the mystery, it's the beauty, it is exquisite presence. But if you've been away from it for a long time, you kind of have to start with the accumulation of emotions and other things that might be there. So I was simultaneously becoming a mother and also reweaving my relationship with the feminine, which changed me and also started my work really of how can I come back into the feminine myself? How can I live from this place? And how can I teach my child to have this foundation? And then how can I serve the women in my community in a more full way?
Oh, I love how you speak about this. If somebody is listening to this and thinks, I don't know what you mean about embodying the feminine, what do you mean by that?
Well, I think that well, like one thing, my friend and I, who were both becoming mothers kind of around the same time, we thought we would work on our PhDs while we had babies. Like, that's one thing.
Sounds like me.
They'll just be sleeping in the corner and we'll be getting all these things done. And like the first weeks, as most mothers know, is just, you're just trying to get a shower in, you're just trying to get food in your body. We don't have the way of holding collectively mothers. So you're often with a partner or, a single mom or one partner. Nobody knows really how to care for a baby. Most people don't have a lot of exposure. So things like, I didn't know how to care for my postpartum body. I was swollen and achy and bleeding and unaware even that I needed rest. I was used to just getting up and going. And so I tried to just get up and go, and that didn't work. I almost felt like things were going to fall out. So I didn't know how to rest. I didn't know how to enjoy and savor the mystery that was coming in with this baby. I felt almost panicked. So it was so foreign, I just didn't have the practices in place to enjoy the downtime, the rhythm of a baby, the dream time that comes in. I had to kind of learn those things. They weren't part of my upbringing. They weren't part of my culture. So, it was foreign. So I didn't know how to care for myself, and I didn't really know how to slow my pace and be peaceful in that and actually even enjoy it as pleasurable. Those were things I had to learn. So when we're embodied, we move slower. We can move quickly, but we have a relationship to our body. So we kind of know what we need and we track it through time, not perfectly, but then it can be a source of pleasure and enjoyment. And it was like a foreign language. I absolutely had to learn everything differently. And at first it felt awkward and it felt strange and I didn't feel very good at it. I felt very good at school, and the baby I had in front of me didn't operate under that kind of structure. So I had to learn how to be with him, be in his pace, work with his body. And he invited me to that place. But because I had no framework, I had to kind of update my own framework for living from that. And that really wasn't an overnight process. I call him my first pancake because it was like learning. I wrote the books I've written as love letters to women and mothers, wild feminine, wild mothering, wild creative, of how to kind of the things I learned on the way that I hope maybe will give someone more comfort while they're, in that state that I was in where I really had no guideposts.
It's also mind-blowing that you studied women, like you knew how the body worked in terms of a medical way. Like you would have gone into this experience of becoming a mother and understanding the anatomy of it more than most of us. And yet it still totally floored you. It was still completely not what you expected. How? Why how did we get here, Tami?
There lies the paradox. I think it's because we don't have embodied medicine. So I certainly knew the mechanics of the pelvic floor. I myself stretched my perineum kind of mechanically in preparation for my baby. But I only understood this in hindsight, right? Hindsight is 20/20. I was like, I wasn't actually feeling my perineum from an embodied place. I wasn't touching my own body and with it in a way that was present. I was
Wow.
mentally doing it from the outside. And very much when we prepare in these ways, we're preparing in sort of mechanical ways, not embodied ways. So it was really, I think, by going through it, then I realized how much I didn't know. And I would say as well that women's health physical therapy is a beautiful practice of pelvic care, and yet it really doesn't make room for the mystery of our bodies. It doesn't go into the fact that our wombs are portals. It doesn't understand that the energetics of our body actually has knowledge and reference points for us as mothers, as women. And that's sort of what I came to. But that was the longer journey that I had to look back and go, oh, I know certain things. There's a whole bunch missing. And when I went to the literature to try to explain what is this powerful energy that I don't even know in myself, I had to write my way there through many thousands of women over a decade of more of time, to go, oh, this is what would have helped me understand that. But I had to kind of do it backwards, write what would have helped me because it was missing.
I've been doing this podcast and researching what happens to a woman and how do we prepare ourselves better when we become mothers my oldest has just turned 17. And I think my first article was published when she was 1. So 16 years I've been asking this question. And the way that you just said the preparation was a mechanical preparation rather than an embodied preparation is probably like, oh, I've got goosebumps, Tammy. That's probably one of the best ways to describe what we're doing. Well, not what we're doing wrong, but where the gaps are. We can get it with our head, but we're not getting it with our body. We're not.
No.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with let's just back up to menstruation. We teach girls or women how to use a tampon or how to use a pad, or that maybe we've come a little further into that it's rhythmic and there are times when you have bleeding and times when you're ovulating. But a deeper understanding would be teaching her that her womb is a source point of knowledge for her and of energy download, and that when she's bleeding, she's shedding energy that she picked up that she might not want or need. And that's a good time when she's also more open to her dreams, because it actually is an access point. And there were cultures that listened to the dreams of menstruating women to hear their knowledge. If we taught girls that, and that it's okay to shelter and journal and feel your own sensitivity. It's not a hormonal thing. It's not that you're moody. It's that you're a source point for the culture, and you might start with your own self. It's a source point for you. Go ahead and cocoon, go ahead and journal, and then come out when you're more in the ovulation. You're going to feel more sturdy, if you will, because your energy will be more contained. If women, that's the difference between like a mechanical preparation and the truth of what we are. And so it's making bridges. And if you think of that for menstruation, for sexuality, for pregnancy, for birthing, for miscarriage, for menopause, for all the things, that's what it looks like to repair the understanding that is really a matriarchal understanding that we are the center as women. And if we know that in ourselves, then we can teach other people to honor us differently and care for us differently and give us better health care that matches our bodies and so on.
So I know you have 3 sons, that's correct? Mm-hmm. So yes. How did your transformation unfold as you began to find this for yourself and you continued on this experience of matrescence? Can you share with us the difference or the...
Mm-hmm. I would say, first of all children come in through the portal and they all need a foundation in the feminine. So part of it was me realizing the feminine wasn't a gender, not for me and not for them. All children come in and need to know they're part of the mystery and hopefully keep that mystery in contact with their body. And it helps if mothers are feeling that in themselves. So that's a whole healing, that you may or may not get, or people may or may not get. And so we start with what we have and we do healing. I started to understand that pretty early with my boys, because what I noticed is there really wasn't a difference between them and girl children, if we're going to, genderize, because women would say to me, or people would say, oh, you're doing all this work for women. It's too bad you don't have daughters, and I looked at my sons and I would see they're very intuitive. They were very attuned. Men actually, because they were the hunters and the fighters, they're actually quite psychic. And all children need a foundation in the feminine. And that's where it all begins. That's our magical child. That's our mystery. That's our connection. That's how we come in. Then we move into more form. And as we developed, of course, we in this non-polarity experience, so I can't even really get into that right now, but let's just say girls and boys, there is a differential. And you see that if you have sons and you have daughters, at least for me, my boys were all drawn to sports, not that girls can't. They all wanted to throw balls and hit things and propel in the masculine kind of external energy. But they always tracked back to one of us, but especially me. Mom, look at me. Mom, see me. Mom, look how strong I am. Look at me throw. They're orienting back to a source point, right? And so, yes, their energy maybe is more propelling, which is the masculine. And so from there, then we go into adolescence and there's more hormones and more things. And there is a way girls or people with a womb center are different because they have an access point within. That's why those are usually the people that are the center of any family or community or so on. Males or masculine oriented are more external. And so there's a way that they do shift. And there was a point where I noticed I could really lift and hold my boys well, but then they walked away from me and they needed to, and they walked into the culture and they had to battle with that. And they really are still in that process of figuring out what is healthy masculine? How do I be a man in this world? What does that look like? So it's like that foundation is so key and so universal. And then there's how we are moving as a culture and what does it look like to be healthy? How do you activate your feminine? How do you activate your masculine? What does it look like in a female body? What does it look like in a male body? And how do you move from there? So I'm not sure if I answered what you were, but, it's amazing how much it pertained to my sons. And when I look at men in the culture that aren't healthy, it's usually because they've lost the feminine, ironically. And from there, it's kind of a false masculine because they're not moving from their own intuition. What I've noticed is my sons are all very in tune, very beautiful, very in touch with their own beauty, very present because they've got that foundation. And from there, the masculine comes out. And so, they're very powerful young men. And so what we see in kind of the distortion is usually a lack of the feminine. Now, then there's also sometimes a lack of permission to evolve into the masculine. That's a whole nother story.
I love just a little quick acknowledgement. I love that you said the false masculine rather than the toxic masculine, because I feel that just acknowledges that it's a product of our culture. And to say toxic implies this choice. And anyway, like you said, that's a whole other podcast. As mothers of boys, of sons, as I have one, how do we stay that feminine, reassuring steadiness that they absolutely need when they're younger, and then also encourage them to go out into a world and find their own examples of masculinity when we do know that it is such a false masculine culture? I once heard, Tami, and I don't know, I apologize, I don't know where this came from, but I once heard that boys need the first 7 years their mother, the middle 7 years is their father if they, are able to have one, and then the third 7 years is an external role model, an external masculine role model. That could be a coach, it could be a scout leader, it could be a principal or a teacher.
Absolutely.
And so when we look at that, then as the mothers, we're kind of stepping back from seven. So what do we do here?
No, I think I've learned a lot about this, and I actually am going to teach a class with one of my sons next year because I think it's such an important conversation. And I've waited a while to kind of I have an almost 25-year-old, right? And I've waited a while to even speak on this, even though I feel like I know a lot just because I'm still learning. I think what I know now, often through the learning, right, is we do well to touch our sons a lot, see them, be in deep connection. To really recognize how they're seeking connection, because it isn't always through words. It depends on your son, but it can be through eye contact or see me or whatever. They need us so much. So really staying present through the years. I've found that saying of being a potted plant really effective for all teenagers, I think, but you're just kind of a potted plant in the background doing whatever you're doing. And then they'll just land and all of a sudden they like need you, and then they're out again. And so again, not taking it personally, but you're just there, and then they swoop in and then they're out, because that's an elder role, right? And it used to be held by a community. So it is challenging. I'm not going to say it's not challenging to be in these nuclear families and a lot of pressures on moms. The other thing is realizing that boys absolutely have to go away from you, and that isn't anything on you. Like they're wired to, like, think about that, to go out and hunt or fight.
Yes.
That is not that long ago. So they absolutely need to separate. And I think I probably didn't realize how vital that was until I got kind of entangled with my oldest son, and he was kind of pushing me away, and I didn't know what was going on. And I've learned working with him that to give the other boys more freedom. And I watch other mothers struggling with this because they haven't been through it. And it's like, that is so necessary for masculine development. So it's almost like what I've learned is you're there when they drop in, and then you hold space in your own center. I do a lot of spirit work, prayer work. There's things I write about in Wild Mothering about working with the birth field of your child, kind of almost like a prayer. I use that because energetically they can really feel you. And then I let them go out and come back, and that activates their masculine in a way. So it's almost like we have to understand how they're wired and not interrupt that flow. And if we're too much in there, we actually kind of interrupt that flow. And so there's many pieces to it, but I'm going to co-teach it with my son because I want his voice in there. Because I think we're really in a time that men are needing to heal, but a little bit lost in that healing. And there's some coding that blocks them and whatnot. So being a mother of sons is a really important role. You cannot love them too much. You cannot show up for them too much. I personally, as my two sons have left the home and live, one is in college, one is post-college, I try to visit, I try to call, I do try to just keep the contact. Sometimes they don't want to talk about anything other than, something very casual. It doesn't have to be a deep conversation, but it's sort of like, I see you, I value you, I know who you are as a valuable human,
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Well, please let me know the details of that because we would love to pop it in the show notes. I will be there taking notes. I think this is an area of motherhood that is really important for us to pursue because it is really hard to and these beautiful souls, both boy and girl souls that are coming through, see that there's a lot of things they want to do differently. They feel what's happening in the world, and it's our role as the mother to really be steady in who we are for them.
I think you cannot take anything personally. It doesn't mean you don't. Sometimes, like when there's difficulty and they're grappling with something, you may feel the discord or they may even push against you. But I think it's really important to stay in the elder role and be like, take it to spirit, take it to a friend, I like to go to the Great Mother and just sit in prayer and give it to the earth and kind of ask for support. I've always get those prayers answered. It's like, this is your child and I'm the caretaker, but this is your child. Can you help me or help them? And children know, all of us know how our mothers feel about us. So I think the most important thing you can gift is unconditional love. And sometimes you have to gift it to yourself. And it doesn't have to be mental. It can be like breathing into the heart. I'm about to teach a class on the heart, like opening the heart, breathing into the heart and letting it fill you up. Because this work is hard, especially when you get into the tricky places of older children. And so putting the heart energy for yourself as mother and then to your child, no matter what is going on, pouring that unconditional love towards them, that's really important medicine. And mothers are powerful.
Yeah. I've never shared this story before, and I'll keep the details vague out of privacy, but one of my children was going through a really difficult time, and it was a few days. And everybody was incredibly stressed and everybody was really worried about where she was and what was happening. And it was probably one of the hardest times I've been through, Tami. But I remember every night I just got into bed and I just visualized this like connection that she felt with this safety of home. Yes. And it was almost like a energetic umbilical cord of yeah. And I was like, you know that when you're okay and when you're ready, you know that you'll be able to come home and all is okay. And I did that for days and days. It was the only way I could get through it in terms of
Yes.
survival. But since then,
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
continued that practice with all three of
Yeah.
them. Whenever
Yes.
anything is going on with them, even if they're just having a bit of a shitty time at school and they're rolling their eyes at
Yeah.
me at the dinner table, that
Yeah.
night I'm
Yeah.
like, you know what? I don't have to, because sometimes, especially with teenagers, and for all of the mamas listening with little ones, you're like, oh God, this is coming. But
I know.
sometimes
Yeah.
because we are so involved in their lives when they're little, it is so our responsibility to go into that school and talk to the teacher about the inappropriate friendship, or we're so involved.
Right.
And then as you feel them moving away, it's a lot of self-work to stay steady in yourself and not panic and not reach and grab, but just
100%.
be there and trust that energy is there and always will be. Yeah. It's been really challenging.
I think that's partially because we're in this sort of non-tribal nuclear situation. We do feel kind of alone in it. And I will say too that mothers, however we were parented or whatever our wounding is, will always come up. So it, as your child is pushing against you, if you haven't kind of healed all your heart wounds, which who has, it does feel personal. And it sometimes even they're yelling at you or they're saying things that you're just like, what is this? Ow, like you were so sweet. And we had this, it's just like, what is going on? But that's where the neutrality, like taking, it doesn't mean it doesn't hurt, doesn't mean you don't get stressed and worried 100%, but taking it somewhere like you did in the meditation. And what you're describing is kind of similar to, in the Wild Mothering book, I had a drawing made of some of the birth field where we bring a child in, or if you adopt a child, you can be the adopter of that field. There is a field of energy that belongs to every mother-child pair. And we can actually go into that. So what you're talking about is kind of intuitively, you reached for that. It is a psychic space that exists that we can go to. Now, whenever I've been in struggle with one of my kids, when I'm like feeling frustrated or feeling disheartened, or it tends to contract and we tend to kind of close down. So when you go to the field, like you're saying, where we open and we kind of say, I know this is medicine for both of us. It holds us, it holds you. And it's not like a prayer, but you're kind of opening to that energy that brought them in. Something always moves. I mean, it really is an anchor point. It's a place that is vital for mothers to know about. And it's why I had it sort of drawn out by an artist and it's in the book. But I think it's important that we're talking about this so mothers know everyone has it. It's not, nobody's special. Like this is something every mother child gets. And you can reach for this as a mother to kind of hold you and let the great mother hold you and let that psychic space, that field energy of this child hold you. And kind of, I always like to say, I kind of put a prayer in it. I'm like, please take care of this child. Please help them find what they need. And what's amazing is it always moves something, that really prayers do get answered with this kind of space holding. It's when we're closing down and reacting that it gets kind of locked in. So it's a nice thing to know about, to reach for, so you as a mom can be held and you can have some support that will come from the mystery, because they really are mysterious, these children.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for letting me share that story. And I remember reading that in your book ages ago, and I'd actually forgotten that that's what I was doing at the time. And it was an incredibly healing thing to connect with in that moment. So could we talk?
And I just want to, other thing I want to say about that is I think what we also have to recognize is we don't know what lessons our children are learning, right? So like it can also feel kind of like, well, what did I do wrong? Or why are they in this space? But it's also, everyone here is learning and our children are going to have their lessons and we can't stop them from that and shouldn't. And so it's good to kind of, again, put it in a bigger space, a bigger container from the mystery,
That's it. It also leads to this idea of trusting, trusting that space, trusting that connection, trusting that power. Which kind of leads into what I was going to ask next anyway, which is if our entry into motherhood is physically traumatic, because I know you speak a lot about the power of the womb and the pelvic floor and the pelvis, like all of that. So if we have in this process of becoming a mother had any traumatic experience and perhaps maybe even lost trust in ourselves or our body.
Right.
For both the mamas that are listening, but also so many women who listen to this podcast work with mothers in this space.
Yes.
Can you share with us what the healing is there?
That is a big passion of mine, and that's births that don't go as planned, that feel traumatic. I feel very passionate about that because babies have to be born physically. There's a point, right? They have to come. But energetically, there's a field, a birth field, I call it, where there's this opening in the womb and that child comes through, that there is no time and space around that. So we can track back to that. And I've learned this, I'm distilling what I've learned through many decades of work with women, and I work on the body. So I used to work a lot with babies. So I learned a lot about how to work on babies and started to notice when I would work on women's wombs that it would help resolve birth trauma. So there's an energetic process I take women through. Again, it's written in Wild Mothering. For those that are curious, there's a whole description about the power of the birth field for healing birth trauma, because there is no time and space around this. And there's several stories at the back of the book shared with women's real stories. That I wanted birth stories because we all read the beautiful birth stories that you're like, oh, wow, okay. But I wanted to track those stories that didn't go as planned, because I wanted to bring the medicine, because every mother should have a beautiful birth field with her child and can. There's no time space around that. So there's a description of the meditations. There's artist drawings from kind of how I would see it when I would see it get repaired, and what we were tracking, so that people can understand what they might just, what happens is the birth field might not get fully formed because it gets interrupted. So you track back and you do a little meditation to kind of complete the pieces that didn't happen. And at the back of Wild Mothering are women's stories who happened to be seeing me while I was writing this book. And I just said, can you, in your own words, talk about the trauma and the interruption, how it felt, and the birth work, birth energy work, and what changed for you, and can you share that in a story? So there's several women's stories of that, so that women can kind of understand stories are medicine, right? We learn a lot through stories. There's also a story about a friend of mine who had a 29-year-old daughter who was getting ready to get pregnant, and it triggered the birth trauma of her daughter's birth. So we did a repair on this, and it ended up kind of repairing and going through the daughter, who then conceived a child, the grandchild. And it's a really powerful story called Healing Birth Trauma Across 3 Generations. And again, they wrote it and I helped curate it. And I think it's beautiful to understand that if you have trauma, there's repair for you. And then you can use that energy to help you continue to heal and use it as medicine with your child. And I feel very passionate. I'm also going to be teaching a class called The Energetics of the Birth Field for birth workers or anyone who's interested in the new year, just because, again, it's like one of my passion points is making sure all women feel that they have a beautiful birth field, because it's like a matrix. It is always there. It's just whether or not you feel it.
And this is why your name constantly comes up in our Mama Rising training, because the work you're doing is incredible. And rest assured, everyone who's listening, we will put all of the links in the show notes. I've actually seen someone, Tami, in my community who had 20-plus-year-old children who only now was able to work through what happened. And in her own words, I did do a podcast with her about it, to like truly heal. And in that healing and almost reprogramming, now that I'm listening to the way you're speaking about it, reprogramming that space, changed the relationship with her own body and her health, but also with her children. And so I think it's such a powerful thing. Like you said, there is no time or space around this. This is something that you can do no matter when.
Yes. Yeah. And if I had had time to collect all the stories, there would be so many more. So I think it's helpful to know, like, women feel different. They feel different in their body. They feel more complete, because just telling the story, that can be healing in one level, but it doesn't change the imprint. So it's about working through the actual imprint that makes the change. And there's a structure to that. And, so anyway, it's in the book for people that are curious, but it's not even actually that hard. It's dropping into the knowledge in our body. So you can't really think your way there. It's sort of a felt energetic repair. And yeah, I've had a lot of women describe it shift, or the child respond, or like in the case with my friend who was 29-year-old daughter, we were doing it and her daughter started calling. And I mean, it was just like they feel the shift. So, and conceived the grandchild that night. I mean, it was just like,
wow.
I make this stuff up. Yeah. So, it's always fun to just kind of validate it, but it's real. Our bodies are very powerful.
Yeah. Talk about generational healing. Yeah. Thank you. I would love to continue to talk to you and share your resources, both with the phenomenal women who support mothers in our community, but also the mamas that are listening. So, Tami, thank you for all that you do. Your books are phenomenal. I feel like we only scratched the surface of everything I wanted to speak to you about. So hopefully we get another chance again.
That would be lovely, Amy. Thank you so much for just holding space for the mamas and those who care for them. They're the center.
Thank you. They sure are. Thank you.
Thanks, as always, for being a part of our global matrescence community. Please take a moment and make sure you're subscribed to this podcast in your podcast player so you can always be notified of our next episode. And if you would like to work with a coach on your own experience of matrescence, please go to mamarising.net and explore our directory of phenomenal coaches, workshop leaders, space holders and facilitators around the globe. You can also explore our Global Matrescence Foundation and consider donating so a mama in need can access the support of one of our coaches and still ensure that our coaches receive the income and support they need so they can continue to work in this way. And finally, if you would like to be a coach, a facilitator and a matrescence activist in your own community, jump on our waitlist for our next intake of the Mama Rising Facilitator Training at mamarising.net. Thank you for being here and being part of this movement. Until next week, bye.